It's already been a little over a month since the 3.0 release of the Chaos Dwarfs, and we've already got 3.1 dropping with a ton of bug fixes, quality of life updates, a new free LC legendary hero, and a lot more. So let's get straight into it. If you missed the roadmap, Creative Assembly, of course, did release their Vaporware roadmap, which actually turned out to be real. So it shows the next 3 DLCs focusing on Tzeentch, Cathay, Kislev for the first, Nurgle, Empire Dwarfs for the second. The third will be Slaanesh, plus another 2. We'll see what comes alongside them, but let's just get straight into it. A few sort of high-level highlights for those of you guys just looking for a quick summary. Obviously, new legendary hero Bretonnia is getting a full battle overhaul, I would call it, a complete battle rework, which is awesome. There's a new endgame scenario for Chaos Dwarfs. There's a new pack of Regiments of Renown for the base Warhammer 3 factions, all low-tier-ish troops. And that's basically the high-level highlights. Obviously, a ton of balance changes and bug fixes as well, as mentioned, so let's get straight to it. Yes, the free LC legendary hero. Let's go ahead and check out the trailer for that.
In the tales of the Norse and the Kurgan, there is legend of a warrior unparalleled.
Already we can see here it's very clearly a Horn champion.
A champion forged in the
Now,
heart of
as to
fear,
what faction he'll be available
who
for, I'm
reached
not
into
sure
the
exactly
grave
what yet.
and found
I did
only
ask,
hate.
and I mean, by the time you guys are seeing this, it will be released, so you can just go check for yourself in-game, but obviously, potentially Warriors of Chaos, Khorne, or Norska, or possibly all 3. It would be pretty cool if he was available to all 3, in my opinion. But currently, he's going to be facing off against the Undead. We've all been there, and automatically this guy becomes my favorite Khorne character, if not one of my favorite characters of all time, because, oh yeah, cue the music, everything else, and yeah, he's going to be facing off against hordes and hordes of undead, skeletons, graveguard, zombies, and of course, the Blood Dragon, who just gets absolutely smashed. Yes! This is maybe one of the best trailers Creative Assembly's ever made, to be honest. Just a Khorne bro, just murdering hordes and hordes of undeads. I think this is maybe my favorite trailer of all time.
As lesser men wield
Yep.
armies.
Still got to take down the Necromancer. We've got more, you know,
It is to become
vampires
fear
and zombies and all
itself.
sorts of nasty things. I love how they literally just all stop and look and turn to
The
him.
hammer storm.
Based on this, I mean, we see aspiring champions behind him, so he'll probably be available for Warriors of Chaos at the very least. I'm sure if he's not available for Khorne or Norska, modders might be able to make that happen, but yes. That's right, Harold Hammerstorm, the free LC officially for Warhammer 3. Yes, it's pretty cool. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, love the Khorne aesthetic, love his design, and of course the trailer of just murdering hordes of undead is, again, just absolutely a work of art. So thanks to Creative Assembly for that, definitely made my day. Let's get back to the patch notes and talk more about some things. Yeah, the Endgame Crisis. People who watch this channel probably don't watch it for that, but yes, there's a Chaos Dwarfs Endgame Crisis. Let's get to the Regiments of Renown. There's some very interesting choices here, starting with, for Cathay, we've got Peasant Archer Regiment of Renown, the Bandits of the Silver Road. They've got flaming attacks and flammable on contact. They've also got Vanguard and Woodsman, so they can act as sort of a forward vanguard to help synergize with... There's not a lot of stuff that does flaming damage, I guess, on Cathay's roster. You've got the Fire Rain rockets, some spells, so there's some small potential for synergy there. Not incredible, but still be an interesting choice for Cathay, depending on price. Moving on to the Horn Regiment of Renown, we've got Flesh Hounds, the Hounds of the Blood Hunt. They've got the Dampen Contact effect, which removes magical attacks now. Can be potentially pretty strong, especially for a faction that is going to rely on a lot of physical resistance, especially to go after like a specific high-value target too. They're also immune to contact effects, which is certainly interesting. And is that Gore Feast I see down there on their unit card? If that's the case, and they have regeneration in melee. That is pretty massive, but remains to be seen. You guys, again, have to let me know. I'm actually out of town when you guys are seeing this. Creative Assembly was kind enough to provide me the patch notes a day in advance so I could record this for you guys. I'm going to be, on vacation when you guys are seeing this, so you'll have to let me know. Anyway, moving on to the Kislev Regiment of Renown, we've got some Armored Kossars, the Watchmen in the Night. They've got Frostbite, of course, and dual swords, giving them much heavier weapon strength and anti-infantry. Doesn't help that in this screenshot they've got, Frenzy, which I guess is based them, also Regiment of Renown ability, but also like the Balalaika of the Ilari or whatever it's called from the Patriarchs and some other stuff affecting them, so very interesting. Rabble Rouse is that other one that looks like immune to psychology. Basically is like an AoE immune to psychology, essentially, which will be pretty good. I mean, Kislev's not that vulnerable to morale shocks, but can sometimes be. So that's pretty nice. Moving on to the Nurglings, we've got the Brawlikers Bubonic, which Nurgle definitely gets the best named Regiments of Renown consistently. They've got a damage reflection ability in melee, so they'll be able to hit back pretty hard. And I believe they have a lack of Cloud of Flies, right? So they don't have Cloud of Flies for the extra melee defense. Instead, they've got this blister back to be able to dish out additional damage when things are hitting them. So it will be interesting. I'm not sure how well it'll play out in practice, but definitely there's some potential there. For Slanesh, we've got the Princes of Perfection. They're devoted marauders with spears. You can see they've got big old heavy shields. Soporific Musk as well. Some perfect vigor, so they can act as a little bit better of an anvil. Finally, for Tzeentch, we've got the Chromatic Abominations. These guys have got a bit more ammo. Of course, one of the biggest weaknesses of Blue Horse is their relative lack of ammo, especially given their massive model counts. So these guys, at least based on the screenshot here, have 16 ammunition, which is insane. I think they'll probably be an auto pick in most Tzeentch armies because the amount of DPS you can output with that many shots is pretty enormous. I mean, I think Blues base have like maybe 3 or 4 volleys, so it's basically like taking 4 Blues all in one in terms of their DPS potential. Obviously, they can take damage and lose that out pretty quickly, but still should be pretty interesting. They also have a barrier replenishment ability, so that will help definitely keep them alive as you cast spells. Boglars of the Mad Marshes are the Noblars of the Ogre Kingdom Regiment of Renown. They've got poison attacks. The Toad Noblars, or the Boglars as they are called. They have poison standard, and they regenerate when standing in water, which is not wildly useful for multiplayer. There's not actually that many maps in multiplayer rotations that have shallow water on them for balance reasons, but in campaign, again, how many maps are you going to run into that have shallow water on them? It's a super situational ability. Fun for flavor, not actually that good, but the poison in and of itself might be enough to make them worth it, certainly. Now, moving on to my personal favorite piece of the entire update, of Bretonnia is getting quite a bit of changes. So, in campaign, damsels now can use troths. Pretty small, but it's nice. The final vow or troth also grants permanent access to Blessing of the Lady for any character that obtains it. Again, small, but definitely adds some nice flavor. Blessing of the Lady now provides 15% ward save instead of physical resistance. The justification being that physical resistance isn't what it used to be. There's a lot of things that have magical damage now with demonic factions and everything else, so they've changed it to damage resistance to better reflect how it was supposed to work in tabletop, I believe. Blessing of the Lady now grants ward save. Now, certain units, so non-Grail Knight units, like Knights of the Realm, for example, now opt to take Blessing of the Lady in multiplayer for 200 gold. So you can pay to upgrade. It is quite a bit, but, and again, if the unit routes, I believe it still will be lost, but it's a pretty, I mean, potentially, if you have some leftover gold and you've fully kitted out your 20 stack, you don't have any room for more mobs, then an extra 200 gold, rather than going into chevrons, you could maybe buy Blessing of the Lady on a non-grail unit. I believe Blessing of the Lady was also given to a few more units baseline. We'll have to check that here. Let's see. Anyway, their interplay between Bretonnian knights and peasants is now represented. So all knight and knight characters have the new knight attribute. It's a tag in game. They don't take any leadership penalties if any unit with the peasant attribute routes nearby. All peasants obviously then have the peasant attribute, which is used for the targeting purposes. Knights errant specifically also get a new ability called Impetuous. So whenever they're charging, any friendly unit within 35 meters becomes immune to psychology for 30 seconds. So it kind of gives an extra little bit of timing leadership buff, especially if you're using them to kind of hammer and anvil into your own kind of lines, right? Anyway, yeah, it's should be interesting, definitely. So all peasants now have a new passive ability as well, called Peasant's Duty. They gain +8 leadership if they're near a knight unit, so kind of similar to Cathay's mechanic, where they have proximity benefits based on different unit types. This time it's interplay between infantry and cavalry for the most part, and it definitely is cool to get that extra synergy. So Bretonnia's leadership should be a little bit better now. We'll see. They might have nerfed the baseline leadership of some of the Bretonnian infantry to kind of compensate for that, but let's see here. So Grail Guardians and Grail Knights also have been rebalanced. They're now more of a monstrous cavalry with a lower model count, 48 for Grail Knights and 32 for Grail Guardians. So that means now that they have majority armor piercing damage both. We'll see how much that changes them in combat. I believe they also got splash attacks as well. We'll maybe take a look at that in just a moment. Hippogriffs also get the full Grail package, so they get Perfect Vigor, Blessing of the Lady, magical attacks. It's a really nice buff for them. Definitely helps to kind of accentuate their place at the top of the Bretonnian food chain, if you will. Yeah, they've also had some collision fixes and whatnot. The Grail Relic, now that, you know, you have other sources of leadership buffs, the Icon of Devotion now buffs melee attack, and doesn't buff leadership as much. So definitely will be interesting. I think it will be honestly a lot more useful with a melee attack buff overall, just especially helping your lower tier infantry and such trade more cost effectively. Is always a good thing for sure. So love to see these changes for Bretonnia. We'll take look maybe more details here in just a minute when we get to the faction specific changes, but yeah, some other stability crash fixes. Let's see here, some AI improvements as well. I'm not really going to highlight those too much. You can go check out the patch notes for yourself if you would like. Tooltip changes. So yeah, there's with the new campaign tooltip changes, right, you were able to see what skills affected what units. That highlighted a lot of issues, so they've gone through and corrected a bunch of those issues, either visual or real. So you can go through and check those as well. The mass tooltip was actually bugged, so in the previous patch, the mass would actually display, like for cavalry, for example, the mass of the rider and the mount, which only the mass of the mount matters for game calculations. Same thing with chariots, it would like add up the mass of all the different entities. And anyway, so the mass tooltip has now been fixed, and it should now display the correct number as it pertains to calculations in game. Yeah, so there's also been some other mass-related changes based on feedback in 3.0 to some of the cavalry units. They've gone through and buffed mass sort of again on a lot of things to kind of bring it up to standard. They've tried to generally break things up into different mass brackets, like light cavalry, medium cavalry, heavy/shock cavalry, monstrous characters. So it's still a work in progress. If you guys have any feedback, of course, be sure to leave it in the comments down below. I'm sure I'll be talking more about it as I get to play some games and watch some games in this current patch. So another quick update for Domination as well. Players must take a Lord type character as their Lord in Domination or Survival. Hopefully they can't just unsummon them at the beginning, because otherwise that's just going to mean people will start taking like the cheapest possible lords with no abilities and then still unsummon them right at the start, but we'll see. Characters on chariots can now fire magic missiles again. A little bit of a bug that was brought up in the last patch has been fixed. And just, yeah, generally lots of other fixes like that, I'm sure. So let's go ahead and get into the army spells and abilities here. So army abilities for Tzeentch, I believe this is. Inevitable Fate. Yes. Recharge time has been increased. Spells, there was a bug where certain lords, again, just bugs with magic missiles in general, have been fixed. Yeah, the Flames of Asgore has also been fixed so that it no longer like one-shots like single entities if directly targeted on them. Everyone has their price is for Rhesus, I believe, so it's now an AoE debuff with a longer active time. Lord of Torment has been reworked, so it should work a little bit more consistently now. I think it was not 100% working correctly in this most recent patch. Blessing of the Lady, of course, we talked about. Heroic Fortitude. Is that the one for Kislev that's on their characters, I believe, now actually heals a small amount? Or, no, is this actually the one for Gotrek? I forget. You guys will have to let me know down in the comments below. Yeah, some of these other ones. Wasting Sickness. I believe this is the Regiment of Renown, like Toad Riders for Nurgle. It's less of an impactful weapon strength debuff, which is definitely great, but it does have a larger effect range. Makes them a little less blobby, but also a little less powerful. Lance Formation, with Bretonnia getting that massive rework, Lance Formation has been nerfed a little bit to compensate, which I think is probably fine. Makes it a little bit less mandatory, but still quite strong. And Icon of Devotion, again, we talked about that, so it now only buffs leadership up to 8, but also gives +5 melee attack, which is quite nice, honestly. I like that change. Moving on for Kalita, the Venom Staff has been fixed, has a much lower wind-up time as well, which is just fantastic. Braid of Bordeleau, again for Bretonnia. For Albric, has had a buff that gives now 12 bonus versus large. Helm of Ivres has had a bug fix here. Vial of Hashut for the Demonsmith Sorcerer, the generic Lord for Chaos Dwarfs. Now only gives 20% weakness to fire, but gives a greater armor debuff, going up to 60. So should be a little bit less cheesy, but a little bit more synergistic with non-AP troops. Yeah, Chalice of Blood and Darkness also has had its heal amount nerfed, but also goes off now map-wide, I believe, which actually probably makes it better in the long run. Stone Mantle for Astrogoth also has more of a speed debuff and scales across, yeah, 4,000 hit points, so you get a little bit more smooth scaling. Now on to Beastmen specific, so we're getting out of the faction specific changes. Mass buffs. This is something, again, you'll see kind of ongoing. Chariots and Cavalry. We've got a few here. Razorgore Chariot, Feral Manticore, and Razorgore Herd all get some mass buffs. Bretonnia, lots of changes to them. King now has magical attacks, so he gets his full Grail kit. Beaky and the Hippogriff mounts also have a sizable HP buff. Nice to see there. As we'll see, it doesn't apply to the Empire Griffin characters. I'm hoping that they also get the same HP buff basically in a future patch. But as it is right now, Bretonnia is probably going to be the S tier faction. I mean, we'll see. It definitely remains to be seen. But yeah, magical attacks for King Lewin, and he gets like 1,000 extra HP, more melee attack, melee defense, better weapon damage, just overall a major buff on Beaky especially. Alberic, same thing, just gets an overall buff. Yeah, more mass, more weapon damage, a little bit less charge bonus, but more melee attack, 1,000 extra HP. Henri and the Lord on the Hippogriff get the same treatment. You'll notice mass for damsels, and any unicorn-mounted character is going to be going up significantly. The Green Knight also more than doubles in mass, which is really good. That's going to make him a lot better. Yeah, and then you'll see here for the infantry for Bretonnia, they've all had a slight leadership reduction, which I think is warranted given all the other buffs they've received and the sort of interplay between cavalry and infantry now, giving them extra leadership buffs. Also, if Grail Relics are more common, you might actually be benefiting from them on a more consistent basis, even though the effect on morale is less. Yeah, let's see here. Anything else? Mounted Yeoman got a little bit more missile block to be more consistent with other units in the game. Let's see, a little bit of charge bonus, very slight charge bonus changes for some of the knights. Again, very, very slight nerfs. Pegasus Knights also get slightly more bonus versus large, as do Royal Pegasus Knights. Now we get to look at the changes for Grail Knights. So they do get a cost increase. Okay. Number of entities goes down, but the overall HP goes up. So what that means is they're going to have significantly more HP per model. Very interesting. An extra like 800 HP. Yeah, a little bit less charge bonus, up to 120 armor on basic Grail Knights. I say basic, but again, better missile block chance, speed a little bit more consistent. Lower base weapon damage, but plus 15. So they lose, what is that, 5 base weapon damage and gain 15 armor piercing. Also get splash attacks with 2 targets. And a little bit of like changes to acceleration as well. A little bit more responsive, it looks like, in terms of run speed and acceleration. Yeah, so faster and more responsive and more mass. Grail Guardians get something similar, cost increase, but they, again, more HP, get, yeah, 1 more base weapon damage and 18 extra armor piercing damage. They get 3 splash attacks, splash attack targets, similar speed and responsiveness buff, so I'll be very interested to see how these new monstrous Grail Knights and Grail Guardians play out. It's definitely very cool. I love the theming of it and sort of the flavor, but will it actually be very strong remains to be seen. Royal Hippogriff Knights, again, we see perfect vigor, magic attacks, a little bit of a cost increase, but also plus 4 entities. Wow, I must have missed that one earlier on, but going from 8 to 12 entities is pretty huge. They do get a small HP buff. I think overall their HP per model is going to be lower, but still extra leadership, which is just fantastic, and their collision boxes have been optimized. So Royal Hippogriff Knights probably going to be the best they've ever been in this upcoming patch, absolutely. Definitely looking forward to using them. Some, again, small changes to Knights of the Realm. They get a little bit of extra bonus versus large for the ROR here, and other, you know, kind of typical changes. Companions of Quenelle also get the responsiveness buff, but also get a cost decrease, which is very interesting. I'm not too sure about that, but I guess kind of to differentiate them more from the Grail Knights, I guess? Not sure. Anyway, Chaos Dwarfs, moving on. They're definitely one of the other factions that got hit hardest by this patch, getting some very much needed nerfs. They got quite a bit of attention. Astrogoth, Bull Centaur renders. Let's just get straight into it. Some bug fixes, of course. We'll skip past the campaign stuff. You guys can go look at that on your own time if you're interested. As for this channel, we're interested in multiplayer battles, right? So let's get to that. Let's see. Granite Guard now has stats reflective of Origin and Renown. I guess they didn't before. And let's see here. Astrogoth. So he gets a multiplayer cost increase. HP nerf, about 400 less HP. Less charge bonus, less acceleration. His mass gets literally cut in half, which is fantastic. Still has quite a bit at 2500 though, and a slower turn speed as well. So just overall nerfs to all the needed areas for Astrogoth should make him a lot more balanced. Still pretty good though, I would imagine. Drazoth also gets more expensive on Cinderbreath. I think maybe he needed a cost increase on foot as well, remains to be seen. But they do get a mass increase. You'll notice just mass adjustments overall. The Great Taurus, which is confusingly the lower tier Taurus, actually gets a mass nerf, where the Lamasu gets a mass buff to kind of standardize the two of them. And then the Bale Taurus, which is the higher tier one, does have much higher mass to kind of differentiate it from them. And we see that again just throughout a lot of different units here, a little bit of cost increases as well across the board. Various characters and mounts, including Gordas here on both foot and on wolf back. Let's see here. Chaos Dwarf blunderbusses no longer have charge defense against large, which is fantastic, makes them a little bit weaker. I noticed something also. A lot of regiments of renown have 0 reload skill. They're going up to 18. You'll see that with the Granite Guard and some other random ones like the Gallows Giant for Vampire Coast. Blazing Beards, again, 0 reload skill goes up to 18. And here we see the Blasting Charge nerf. So does a lot less single target damage. 8 armor piercing single target goes to 0, and 4 base goes to 1. Does more base explosion damage, but less armor piercing explosion damage. So, I mean, we'll see how big this ends up playing out, like how big of a change it actually ends up being. But I think it should be a lot less potent against like single entities, especially in cavalry. It still will be good against unarmored infantry, but I'll have to compare these numbers to kind of the dwarf blasting charges. I think it still has more armor piercing, but you do have more limited access to it. I think, as we'll see in a minute, Infernal Ironsworn, yeah, they also got just a straight-up cost increase, which is definitely warranted. Bull Centaurs, also, yeah, Sneaky Gits get their base missile damage nerfed just a tiny bit. Bull Centaur Renders get their collision box size increase. That was one of the main issues. It's also had a turn speed nerf, it looks like, and a missile block chance reduction on the shielded variant. Cost increase for all variants as well. And yeah, just some small like melee attack nerfs, it looks like. Moving on. Again, reload skill going up for Regiments of Renown. More changes to monsters that we saw before. Kadai Destroyer gets a little bit more armor and also gets more base morale, so that once it loses its unbreakable ability, it won't just immediately die. It also retains that unbreakable until 25% HP, so it should be a little bit better now. We'll see. Same thing with the Fireborn. They also get a little bit more armor and morale, and that Burning Bright gets a little bit of a buff. Magma Cannon also gets a cost increase, gets a morale debuff, less armor piercing. It looks like base weapon damage mostly in melee now. Also removed the bonus versus infantry. Has a range nerf and a calibration area increase, which means it should be less accurate. So overall, pretty big nerf for the Magma Cannon. Definitely warranted. Death Shrieker, on the other hand, they standardize the morale between the two of them and sort of the melee attack and weapon strength profile. But this one gets a projectile buff. You can see the projectile bonus versus infantry goes up a little bit. I believe this is for the multi-shot. Velocity goes up, which is also pretty fantastic. Calibration distance goes up and the area goes down. I believe that means it's actually an accuracy buff. I'm not sure. A little bit less shrapnels per... or no. Shrapnel velocity. I don't even know. But there you go. A little bit of a buff for the Death Shrieker, it looks like. Dreadquake also gets a cost decrease and, again, standardizing sort of the attack and morale profile here. Yeah, also gets a range increase, so it's now the longest range, definitely as it should be. Iron Demon can now shoot on the move, which is just fantastic. Also gets a pretty considerable buff to attack, defense, charge bonus, armor, weapon strength. I mean, just overall, the Iron Demon, it was already okay before. It's going to be very good now, I think. Dreadquake also, the Dreadquake Train gets a little bit of a cost decrease. Not going to make too much of a difference, but it is something. Moving on, stuff we've seen before. The Skullcracker can now knock back entities much more effectively, so we'll see how this ends up playing out. We'll have to compare the stats directly in game, and you guys now can go do that for yourselves, but yeah, I believe it's just going to be better in melee overall. Like, it should have just better melee stats than the Iron Demon, so we'll see how that ends up playing out. A lot of changes for the Chaos Dwarfs, which they definitely needed, but there you go. Let's move on now to the Dark Elves. Some changes to some campaign mechanics here. Buildings, so on. Let's get to the character changes. So, Dark Elves had a few small changes to like character mount costs and just character costs in general. Some small adjustments here and there. Nothing too massive. Also, speaking of mass changes, chariots and character cavalry. So that's pretty nice here. Helibron getting a little bit of a cost decrease, which is, again, quite nice. A little bit of a buff, especially on our Manticore. Lokir, base cost gets a little bit cheaper there. Maelstrom gets more expensive, though. Again, just more Lord and hero mount costs. A little bit of armor adjustment, it looks like, on the Dreadlord as well. Not a lot else. I mean, there is a lot of just very small things in terms of the character changes, tweaking them, getting them in the right place. Some responsiveness changes also to light cavalry, Dark Riders especially, and Doomfire Warlocks, which is nice. Old One Knights plus 450 mass. Same for Dread Knights. That is very good. And Manticores, of course, also, as with other factions, get buffs. Dwarfs get nothing. Moving on to the greenskins, so Skullmuncher gets more mass to go with the HP buff, same with the base Wyvern mount for the Orc War Boss. The Night Goblin War Boss on his Squig also gets a bit more mass as well. The Pump Wagons were overperforming, so they're going to get their charge bonus nerfed ever so slightly. And the Wyvern, Feral Wyvern, also gets more mass as well. Let's see, moving on to the High Elves, we see once again more mass changes, and I'm really hoping for, again, HP buffs to both Empire and High Elf Griffins. Remains to be seen in the future, but at least they get a little bit of a mass buff, certainly is something to help them out. Tyrion also gets a responsiveness buff with acceleration and deceleration. It's fantastic. Let's see here. Mass for Alistair's Chariot. Reaver Archers get the responsiveness buff of other light cavalry like Dark Riders. Silver Helms also get the responsiveness buff, as do Dragon Princes and the Fireborn. So really nice to see. They also get a little bit more mass as well. But High Elven Cavalry should be some of the most responsive now. Also run speed increase, which means they go from 78 speed to 84 speed. So should help them kind of stand out from other cavalry factions. Speed also does have a pretty big impact on charges, so actually getting more speed does make your charges that much more impactful. Tirnock Chariots here, acceleration. I actually really like a lot of the acceleration, deceleration buffs. The unit responsiveness has been kind of one of my biggest issues with Warhammer 3, so anyway. War Lions and Rahagrid's Pride get more mass. Arcane Phoenix gets way more mass, wow. Absolutely fantastic. Now moving on to Khorne, again, just some mass increases, and a slight mass decrease, actually, for the Blood Crushers and Heralds of Khorne's Fury, and the Skull Crushers of Khorne. Interesting, but definitely increases for some other character mounts. Kislev getting some more buffs. Armored Kossars received 10 additional entities, which is quite nice. Ulrika's getting a very slight nerf to her ammo count, which I think is probably warranted. She had a lot of ammunition, but gets the mass buff of other horse characters. All horse characters and bear characters get mass buffs. Armored Kossars get an extra 10 models and get the extra HP to compensate, so their HP model will remain the same. Zargard Great Weapons at +4 bonus versus infantry. Griffin Legion also get a little bit more mass, so nothing too crazy, but just some other small adjustments. The Armored Kossar change especially, I think, will actually help them quite a bit. Make Armored Kossars actually decent frontline infantry. For Lizardmen now, again, just more mass changes. Tehenowen now has immune to contact effects, which is a nice little change. Should have had all along. I think, do all Red Crests? Yeah, let's check this. I think all Red Crests now have immune to contact effects, which, again, it's not like the biggest thing in the world, but it does mean in certain matchups, maybe if you're expecting a lot of contact effects, like Nurgle, for example, where poison is literally everywhere, suddenly the Red Crest type units and characters become that much better. Very, very interesting, and I love to see that. Okay, Barona's Time Warp on the Spirit of Tepak Regiment Renowned is now bound. Bestilled on Solar Engines also get a little bit of an accuracy buff, which is nice. I haven't really seen Solar Engines much at all in Warhammer 3, which is interesting. They were pretty ubiquitous in Warhammer 2. Very good for a very long time, so hopefully that helps them kind of reclaim their place. Gold One Riders, Horned Ones, all that also get a mass buff. Lots and lots of things get mass buffs, so there you go. Moving on to Norska, the regular Famir and the Regiment of Renown incorrectly had bonus versus large instead of bonus versus infantry, so that has been corrected. Also mass buffs to chariots, characters on chariots, characters on horses, and that's pretty much it. Now let's move on to Nurgle. Just some small changes to mass, very small. And Nurglings also, I don't think their attacks were 100% working correctly before, so it seems like they've corrected that. Ogre Kingdoms, Scrag, and the Slaughtermaster now also have immune to contact effects, as does the Butcher, so all the non-Fire Belly casters have immune to contact effects. Noblar Trappers also pick up +5 bonus versus infantry, which is not something they probably needed. Noblar Trappers are already very good, but it's a nice little buff for the Ogres for a unit that you would already be taking anyway. Moving on to Skaven. Bonebreaker gets a little bit more mass, and that's it, basically, for Slaanesh. Nakari also had, again, his splash attacks reworked, so they should work a little bit more reliably. Mass buffs, Devoted Marauders of Slaanesh maybe got hit a little bit too hard on the nerfs. They're going to pull back their cost now down to 450 since they lost their bonus versus infantry, which I think is probably fine. Spears also get a cost reduction down to 500. I think this is probably the correct pricing structure, given that I think probably now the whips are the best because they have poison. Anyway, ooh, sorry about that. Moving on to the Empire, we see just mass buffs for the most part. All, you know, Griffin characters, Warhorse characters, Pegasus characters, Knights of the Blazing Sun, Demigryph Knights. Yeah, Greatswords also get a little bit of a hard buff. Extra weapon damage, armor piercing, and bonus versus infantry, which is quite nice. And that's basically it. So again, I would like to see some HP increases to those Griffin characters to kind of keep them in line with now the Wyverns and the Hippogriffs. But it's definitely nice to see they're going through and updating some of these old factions to try and keep them in line. Tomb Kings, again, a little bit of mass adjustments. Bone Giant also gets a accuracy buff, which is nice, makes it a little bit more reliable. Tzeentch, just mass changes. Vampire Coast gets mass changes, and the Damned Knights of Silostra also benefit now from the changes to Bretonnia. So if you manage to get some allied peasants, they'll get Impetuous, which is just fantastic. Yeah, Gallows Giant, again, gets the Regiment of Renown missile fix. Vampire counts in campaign, many people will be glad to know the Dead Rise Again mechanic has been significantly nerfed for them. In battle, they just get, again, mass adjustments. Nothing for the Black Coach, which definitely is one that I think needs some serious mass adjustments. I did highlight it to CA, so hopefully it gets in on the next patch. But Black Knights also get Strider, which is something they had in Tabletop. I know Lore Master Sotek really wanted that added, so nice to see that gets in. And finally, the Warriors of Chaos are also just going to get lots of mass adjustments. Chaos Lord of Khorne and Exalted Hero of Khorne on the Gorpy's Chariot had 0 collision attacks, which is kind of interesting. It explains why they didn't ever work for me correctly. But yeah, it should actually work a little bit better now. I'll have to get in and test for myself. Or maybe you guys can test and send me a replay on Discord. Link down in the description below. Should still be active. If it's not, leave a comment and I'll post another Discord link. Yeah, we see other changes that we saw in other factions here, so not too much to talk about. Wood Elves, I guess, forgot about them. They're still here. Yeah, again, mass changes. War Dancers got an additional dance. Ooh, yeah. Okay, we'll have to see what that is in-game. Hawks get a little bit more mass as well. And that's pretty much it. Yeah, there's a bunch of fixing of issues and so forth, but in terms of balance changes, there's not, I mean, it's a lot, but at the same time, it's not a lot. It's mostly just fine-tuning the mass of a lot of cavalry and chariots, which I think is great. I actually think the balance was overall pretty good in 3.0. Chaos Dwarfs needed to be nerfed, and they were. Bretonnia We'll see where the balance for them shakes out. They might be S tier. They might have gone a little bit too far and might have to walk back a little bit of the buffs. We'll see. It remains to be seen, you know, based on the battles. Or they might still be kind of high A tier based on some of the changes made here, because ultimately they are still a pretty predictable faction at the end of the day. So it's hard to say. Let me know what you guys' thoughts in the comments down below. Hopefully you enjoyed this very long patch notes video. If you did, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification button. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.